thought that we are not particular pro-Swire proposal, but we thought that since the government...
By we, you mean the kind of Shanghai, the Hong Kong community of artists, curators, activists?
That's a good question. I tend to speak not so much about West Kowloon Cultural District for a few years because I thought we have, for the whole cultural community in Hong Kong, come together and form a West Kowloon Cultural District Concern Group or something.
Oh, really?
Right. And counter-propose many things and lead by Phil long dealing with the government's people. So they are actually pro-West Kowloon to go ahead. The problem is they thought that other than the hardware, the infrastructure, you have to prepare for all the software for the people, the management, etc.
Yeah.
And for however people more radical like me or another art critics like Chen Wan, who actually won the Lifetime Award for criticism, we both suggest it's better to not do the West Kowloon at all. This is the most extreme position, but shared by those critics that are the most prominent critics in Hong Kong. And even in one article that he wrote in the Chinese newspaper, it says whenever people mentions about West Kowloon Cultural District, he wants to say the vile words. And there was this antagonisms within. However, since it was maybe a Chinese newspaper, the government didn't care about such kind of oppositions coming from the critics. So when I'm saying I thought I could speak in general about the optimisms and the pessimistic view about West Kowloon, but yeah, I try to balance the views, general views when I say we. But
to kind of thinking that the investment could go into different spaces in the kind of Kowloon and Hong Kong urban fabric to develop already existing and maybe using buildings that were already there to develop kind of artist spaces and galleries and cinemas and things like that.
Close to, but for example, why people are bothered to follow the West Kowloon Cultural District discussion is that the government is very clear that if we are not doing the cultural district, this money won't go into the arts or cultural sector. That's the bargain that you have to do, or otherwise they won't be following that. This is exactly the questions why for so long the other things can't get going. It's this mentality, they want some grand projects to be realized rather than really cultivating.
Sounds very French.
So
like grands travaux. So I mean, but given that there, it looks like the commitment's happening, it's going to go ahead one way or another. That these are the kind of constraints that they know that the future is going to bring in Hong Kong. What would be your biggest worry in terms of how it is going ahead? And then secondly, what sort of things could it possibly do that would have maybe the best positive effect on Hong Kong and Kowloon culture in general?
For the worst case, I thought is that we have another very consumer-oriented cultural entertainment business, which is actually targeting for cultural tourism industry, and that's how, for example, the railway system, the connects, the whole cultural district actually start from because Aida wants to come to Hong Kong but couldn't find a venue.
Who was Aida, the opera?
Right.
Okay.
So that's actually how.
And this was 15 years ago, 20 years ago?
Around
1880年
let me think, around more than 10 years ago. And so it was actually very clear cultural oriented. Is actually the Kowloon district is for these purposes. So I have nothing against
a bit like Lion King,
it
a bit like the
right.
Lion King in Shanghai, which has been running for what, 5 years. And
right. We have already Disneyland in Hong Kong, which is actually losing money, and Hong Kong has invested so much money in it that it have to invest more, despite that people already complain from the start, why not invest in something like McDowell or something which is local animation.
Something like, okay, right. Like the animation local animation industry.
Not necessary, but rather than import something international that have nothing to do with Hong Kong character, local character, then you are actually, for example, Shanghai is now negotiating another Disneyland there.
Really?
Right. So it's not a profitable business, even from business sense from the beginning. When you sign with Disneyland, it's already a losing battle from there on. But the worst thing is that it will become another such kind of high cultural places that very little people could afford to go, and very few people who pays for all this money actually borders.
So, I mean, are you more worried about it becoming too much around entertainment, or too much around high culture, or both?
I thought it's a mixture, because for the performance side, it's certainly going to be entertaining theater,
like West End theater sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And as for the museum group, I have more expectation of it because I am a curator myself.
Sure.
And I know how M+ as a concept might give possibilities for doing something that is positive.
Why do they call it M+?
They don't want to pin down themselves as a certain kind of museum. And for example, when we say Lingnam School is actually a school in Chinese painting, and this school then evolved, and so we have in Hong Kong, for example, the modern ink movement in Hong Kong, which is very much like the abstract expressionism in America, which is pacified.
Abstract expressionism, yeah.
Right. In Hong Kong, we have the government museum has actually cultivated a modern art movement, like
what's it called?
Modern ink movement.
Ink, I-N-K.
Right.
Wow.
And so it's a mixture of East and West design element with ink painting, and so for a long time it's dominated the Hong Kong art history, but then it turns to be a dead end or
Starting
artificial.
when?
The
50s, 70s, until maybe 5 or 6 years ago, sort of thing.
It died down long ago, actually. But for example, there was this ink society in Hong Kong which keep proposing to have an ink museum, and even the Hong Kong Literature Circle nowadays propose to have in West Kowloon a literature museum, which I thought wasn't a bad idea to have a literature museum, but why bother? Must it be in West Kowloon?
Yeah.
So this one of our group member actually proposed a writer to do a residence here and see what she could explore by writing a continual journey diary here that people could come in.
But you think the M+ could be a positive thing, though? That's going to be a pretty big space, isn't it? The M+.
Yeah. I don't even want to give it a shot. It's certainly for the curator mindset, it really could be something, but it really depends on who the director you hire. And for that case, I thought if this director have so much power, since we want to shake over the traditional concept of museum, then this director really is either be some very world-class person, or otherwise, if he is hired by and could withstand the present bureaucratic system, then it might not be doing a professional jobs like withstanding all the pressures on political censorship, etc. Or